Thank you for coming. It's Saturday morning. If I was home in America, I'd be asleep now. And I imagine many of you would like to be asleep now. So thank you for coming. I also want to take just a moment to thank my friend and my student, Mr. Murad Mossad, for all the work he has done to organize this program, also with Father Seraphim and the Alexandria School, and all those who've made this possible, our translators. A lot of people did a lot of work, and I'm so very thankful for each one. Because of our little bit of a late start yesterday, we were unable to finish the section on Joseph, and there was still a few more minutes left on this, but because of time we stopped, and it was I was encouraged to try to complete the Joseph part, so we'll just take a few minutes to complete that, and then we'll move on to where we're supposed to be. So we ended the session before the break yesterday morning talking about the magicians that came to try to interpret the dreams of Pharaoh. And these magicians, and the word magician in the Bible in Hebrew is hartumim, and it actually comes from the Egyptian word hericheb, which is this particular kind of priest that you see here. You always see them wearing a cloth across their shoulder and waist, and they're always reading a papyrus document. These priests specialized in reading texts, reading magical spells, reading all kinds of religious literature. One of the things that we believe they did was also to help interpret dreams, as we see in the Joseph story. In Genesis 40, verses 16 through 19, we read about how Joseph interpreted the dream of the one official of Pharaoh, and then the baker, the other official, wanted to have Joseph interpret his dream. First of all, understand that for these men in prison, they did not have access to the priests who had the special manuscripts how to interpret dreams. And so here they were, they had these dreams. They believed the dream was a way God was communicating to them, but they didn't know what it meant. And through God's wisdom, Joseph was able to help them understand. So let me read this. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, the Hebrew the word is tov, he said to Joseph, I also had a dream, and there were 3 cake baskets on my head, and in the upmost or the top basket there were all sorts of baked food for Pharaoh. But the birds were eating it out of the basket on my head. And Joseph answered, this is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from you and hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat the flesh from you. This was a very bad outcome because it meant that he was going to die. The first official, we were told that the outcome of his dream was good. You see, the Hebrew word tov, it was good. Now, all of this makes more sense when we understand how the ancient Egyptian dream interpretation worked. What you're looking at is a papyrus in the British Museum, and this is just a part of it, but what you see is a list of dreams. If you had a dream, you would go to the priest and you say, I dreamt kaza wa kaza. The priest would look for such a dream and say, aha, this dream is good, or this dream is bad. And so we have lists of good interpretations and lists of bad interpretations. So, for instance, in this page, any of you who read hieroglyphs may recognize all the signs on this side here, the signs here, the signs here, is the hieroglyph Nefer. Nefer means good, or even beautiful, but good here. Just like the dream of Joseph that we saw here, it was good. So here's an example. If a man sees himself in a dream at night tying up someone else in order to harm him, good. It is a sign of destroying his enemies, power of speech, and conquering him. So if you dream this is a good thing. You will destroy your enemies. Here's a bad interpretation. If a man sees himself in a dream turning his face down to the ground, bad. It's a sign that something might be required of him by death. And this is how it worked. So you had dreams with good outcomes, dreams with bad outcomes. So if you had a dream, you would stop by the temple on your way to work. You would talk to the priest who had the papyrus and explain, this is what I dreamt. Is it good? Is it bad? Again, in the prison, the officials of Pharaoh did not have access to the priest, but they had access to Joseph, who had the wisdom from God to interpret their dreams, one good and one bad. So we can see that the description of the Joseph story fits very nice the practice of Egyptian dream interpretation. Now, one of the big parts of this story, of course, is how God gave through Pharaoh a dream, and Joseph interpreted this dream about the coming of bad years of Niles. 7 good years where the Nile would flow well, and 7 years bad. We have pictures in a number of places, these from around 2300 BC from Saqqara, and it shows people who come in from the desert areas are very thin, very as a result of famine. And so we do know at different times in history there were very difficult periods where the Nile did not flow properly. And of course this has to do with the rain in Central Africa, the rain in Ethiopia, the rain in Uganda. This will affect the flow of the Nile. So throughout the story of Joseph, the word for Nile, at least in the Hebrew word Hayor is actually the Egyptian word for Nile. It's not just river, it's the technical word for the Nile. And everybody knows, even with High Dam, the Aswan Dam, that the Nile every year in August, September, October will flood. As a child growing up in the Said, I remember seeing the water everywhere in the 1950s, the 1960s, and the roads to our villages would be completely cut off because of the water. But of course, with the High Dam, this is all now controlled. But this was a very important part of the agriculture year in Egypt, because the waters of the Nile would flood the land and make it very good for agriculture. So with the wisdom God gave Joseph, he sees 7 good years followed by 7 bad years. And again, this could be credited to weather conditions in Central Africa. In fact, scientists have cut through the ice on Mount Kilimanjaro in Kenya. And the ice there, they can see by the thickness of the ice and date it and realize that there was a very long period with little rain in Central Africa during the approximate period of Joseph. So there is some scientific evidence to support this reality. From the beginning of Egyptian history, scribes kept records about how high the Nile was on certain dates. If the water reached a certain level in August, this signaled that it would be a good year. If it was below certain levels, this would signal a very bad year. So, from the Ptolemaic period in the 2nd century BC, we have a very famous inscription. I'll show you the picture. Well, I'll show you the picture now. It's carved on Sehel Island, just near Aswan. And on this inscription, it refers to a famine during the days of Pharaoh Zoser, who was king of Egypt during the beginning of the Old Kingdom, 2700 BC. And this is one of the lines from the inscription where the king is told, "I was in great distress on the throne. Those who were in the palace had heart's affliction." They were very sad for the very great evil, since the Nile had not come in my time for a space of 7 years. Grain was limited and fruits were dried up. So here you have maybe 1,000 years before the time of Joseph, a similar event is remembered where the Nile is not flooding properly, not rising properly. But I don't think you can determine from this that this is the time of Joseph, because this is 1,000 years before the time of Joseph. But it's the same idea that you could go through periods where the Nile did not flow properly, and this could be great hardship for the agriculture economy of Egypt. And many of you will know, of course, that Aswan was believed by the ancient Egyptians to be the place where the Nile had its beginning, where the flood began every year. And so it was here on Elephantine Island where measurements were taken to determine the flood levels. At different times in history, these steps were built and rebuilt to keep records. What you're looking at here was a more modern one used up until the 1900s, early 1900s. But even earlier, we have records carved on a stone document. Archaeologists call it the Palermo Stone because part of this is in Palermo, Italy, on the island of Sicily. There are fragments of it in the Cairo Museum. There are fragments of it in Oxford. But it was a large stone, and you can see here the little boxes. And each one of these boxes is marked by a line. If you see this line and it curves at the top, here again it curves at the top, curves at the top. Each one of those lines with the curve at the top is the hieroglyph meaning year. So what you have is a year in the life of the pharaoh and some important event that took place during the pharaoh's reign. And underneath, you have the measurement of the Nile. How many cubits? See, the arm is the cubit. And how many, so the level of the Nile this year was 1 cubit, 4 spans, and 8 fingers. So you can see this number is higher than this number. This number is lower. So this would be recording every year. So the economists would know, is this a good year or a bad year? But they could only know for a few months. They could not know 7 years or 14 years. But Joseph gave Egypt a 14-year economic forecast. And so this was a great thing that enabled Egypt to prepare for the difficult days ahead. Here is a reconstruction, because there are many parts missing, but the record of this seems to go back to the beginning of Egyptian history, and maybe it lasts all the way down till the end of the Old Kingdom. So this was a complete record that included the Nile levels. So you can see how important this is. So, Pharaoh rewards Joseph for his faithfulness, and because you have done this, I'm going to put you in charge of making sure everything works well. I want to focus on verse 41. See, I have set you over the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's hand and clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. Now these small expressions are all very important because they tell us something about the position of Joseph. First of all, putting gold around the neck of an official was the way to reward somebody, an official, for especially important service. This could be service to the government, or it could be military service. A general who won a war would receive the gold. Here you have Horemheb, who was a general, who later became the Pharaoh. So here he is after he led a military campaign into Nubia and brought back prisoners and gold and so on. So the Pharaoh rewards him with gold around his neck. So he's a general. On the other hand, here we have the Pharaoh Seti I, the father of Ramses, and here is a man who is now being promoted to be the new prime minister, the new wazir. Here's a closer look. So you can see him here. Now he is being put into a new office, a new position. So this is a big honor to receive the gold like this, whether you're in the military or in the administration of the king. Now, Pharaoh gave Joseph his ring, and there was a very important position in the Egyptian government, and it's called the overseer of the seal, and the Egyptian word, the ancient word is khatam, just like you have in Arabic. And the overseer of the seal, or the khatam, are officials who are involved in trade and economics. Because what this means is you have the signature of the king, so you can do business for the king. And here are some inscriptions found at Sinai, at Sirabit al-Khadim, and this is where the Egyptians went in the Pharaonic period for turquoise, Feiruz, and for copper mining. And so usually heading up the mission to bring back these valuable resources was the official with the seal. All these marked in red have the seal of the king to conduct business in the name of the king. So it seems that Pharaoh gave Joseph his ring in order that Joseph could conduct business to prepare Egypt for what was coming. Here are the kind of rings we're talking about, where on the one side you have a flat surface with sometimes decoration, sometimes with the cartouche of the king, and these could be turned either way. You could turn it so the scarab is out or the writing is out. They turn and you can stamp it. Here's another kind of seal ring. I discovered this in our excavations in North Sinai, and this is a seal belonging to Queen T. Queen T was the mother of Akhenaten and the wife of Amenhotep III. So by receiving the ring of the king, this meant that Joseph was very powerful and could conduct business in the name of the king. We're told that Pharaoh gave him a gown made of linen. And you only need to look at different statues in the Cairo Museum or pictures carved on stone, and you will sometimes see a man that wears a gown and it's up to the armpits like this. And if you see this, it doesn't matter if it's early in Egyptian history or late in Egyptian history, the person wearing this gown is the vizier. This is the uniform. So no doubt Joseph would have worn a gown like this, and you can see this in many tombs, like the tomb of Ramosa in Thebes, You can see it on statues like this one. Now something interesting happens. Joseph dies, and we're told at his death, Joseph was 110 years old. 110, and they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. Of course, only the Egyptians, and only Egyptians of some wealth, could afford to be mummified. Mummification was not practiced in Canaan. So if Joseph and Jacob had died in Canaan, they would not be mummified. So mummification is something uniquely Egyptian. But interesting that it mentions he was 110 years old when he died, because in ancient Egypt, the number 110 is a symbolic number for a very wise man. Here you see a statue of a very important wise man named Amenhotep, the son of Hapu. Amenhotep, son of Hapu, was the vizier of Amenhotep III. And on his statue in the Cairo Museum, it tells us that he was given as a gift from the king 110 years of life. And also in different wisdom literature, the wisdom of Ptahhotep, I had 110 years of life as a gift from the king. Also, the sage, the wise man Jedi, in Papyrus Westcar, he is described as a man of 110 years old. So it makes you wonder, is it possible that Joseph is being honored in the Bible as a wise man in the Egyptian tradition? That the 110 years is not a literal number in this case, but a number to identify him as one of the great wise men of ancient Egypt, along with Amenhotep, son of Hapu. By the way, Amenhotep, son of Hapu, later in Greek times is worshipped as a god. So he was seen as very wise and later became a god. And then, as I said, Joseph died, and when Jacob died, he also was mummified, placed in a coffin. And this would be the kind of coffin. The coffins change in shape and style and color at different periods of time. But the period of Joseph, if we place him just at the very end of the Hyksos period, this is the kind of coffin that you see in this period. So interesting then that Joseph, in the Joseph story, we see very many elements that look like Egyptian practice, Egyptian wisdom, Egyptian magic, the things we've been talking about. These are the kinds of details that tell me that this story is not a myth, but it's about a real man who lived and served Pharaoh and served Egypt very well. And of course, when he died, we have him making a prophecy. And Joseph said to his family, his brothers, "I'm about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of the land to the land he promised you by an oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." And Joseph made his sons, the sons of Israel, swear an oath, saying, "God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones from this place." So before he died, and in Hebrews chapter 11, the writer of Hebrews reminds us that Joseph, because of his faith in the promises of God, anticipates that God would lead him to the promised land, even as a mummy. And we learn in the book of Joshua that his remains were taken and buried at Shechem, in the very place that his father Jacob had purchased many, many years before. So that's the end of Genesis and the Joseph story, but I wanted to bring this material together before we went on.